There's a number buried in Russian customs data that almost nobody noticed. And when I cross-referenced it with official statements from the Central Bank of Russia and recent policy shifts around strategic commodity reserves, a pattern emerged that Wall Street completely missed. Russia has been quietly accumulating silver, not gold. Everyone watches Russia's gold reserves. We know they've been buying gold aggressively for over a decade as part of their de-dollarization strategy, but silver, that flew under the radar. And based on import data, refinery reports, and domestic production tracking, Russia has accumulated somewhere in the range of 130 to 150 million ounces of silver over the past few years. At current prices, that's roughly $10 to $12 billion worth. But even if we're conservative and say half of that is strategic state accumulation and the rest is commercial and private, we're still talking about a $4 to $6 billion position that was built quietly while everyone was watching gold and oil. Right now, as I'm piecing this together. Comment when you're watching because this is a developing story, and if more data comes out confirming or contradicting what I'm about to show you, we'll track it in real time. And if you value investigative breakdowns that follow the data instead of repeating mainstream narratives, subscribe and comment FinTalk OG so the algorithm knows you're here for the actual detective work. Now, before I walk through the evidence, let me frame why this matters. Russia is a major player in global commodities. They're a top producer of oil, natural gas, platinum, palladium, nickel, and gold. When Russia makes a strategic move in a commodity market, it's not random, it's calculated. And if they're accumulating silver at scale, there's a reason. And that reason likely ties to de-dollarization, BRICS coordination, and preparing for a world where alternative reserve assets matter more than dollar-denominated instruments. If Russia is building a silver position, it tells you they see value that the market is underpricing. And if they're doing it quietly, it tells you they don't want to move the market against themselves while they're still accumulating. Here's what I'm going to show you. First, the import data that reveals Russia's silver accumulation. Second, Russia's domestic silver production and where it's going. Third, official statements from Russian central bank officials and policy documents that reference silver as a strategic asset. And fourth, the BRICS angle and how silver fits into the broader de-dollarization strategy. Let's get into it. Let's start with the import data. Russia publishes customs data, and while it's not always as detailed or timely as Western data, it's available if you know where to look. According to aggregated customs reports and trade statistics from major silver exporting countries, Russia has been a consistent net importer of refined silver over the past several years. Specifically, Russian imports of silver in bar and refined form have been running in the range of 30 to 50 million ounces per year. That's significantly higher than Russia's historical average prior to the escalation of Western sanctions. Now, some of this is commercial. Russia has industrial demand for silver. Electronics, medical equipment, telecommunications, all of that requires silver. But here's the thing. Russia's industrial sector hasn't grown fast enough to account for that level of increased imports. If anything, Western sanctions have reduced Russia's access to certain high-tech manufacturing sectors that would use silver. So the industrial demand story doesn't fully explain the import surge. What does explain it is strategic accumulation. Someone in Russia is buying silver and stockpiling it. And the most logical entity with both the motive and the capital to do that is the state. Let me show you the specific sources. Data from Switzerland, which is a major silver refining and trading hub, shows that Russian entities have been consistent buyers of refined silver bars through Swiss intermediaries. Switzerland doesn't always publish end destination breakdowns, but trade flow analysis and customs records from border countries show silver moving east toward Russia. Similarly, reports from Kazakhstan and other Central Asian countries, which are both silver producers and transit points, indicate increased silver flows to Russia. When you aggregate these flows, you get to that 30 to 50 million ounce per year range. Over a 3-year period, that's 90 to 150 million ounces. Now let's talk about domestic production. Russia is not a major silver mining country compared to Mexico, Peru, or China, but they do produce silver as a byproduct of other mining operations, particularly from polymetallic deposits in Siberia and the Far East. Russian domestic silver production is estimated at around 40 to 50 million ounces per year. Most of that comes from lead zinc mines, where silver is a byproduct. Historically, much of Russia's domestically produced silver was exported, refined abroad, or used domestically in small quantities for industrial applications. But starting around the time of the sanctions escalation, there's been a policy shift. Russian mining companies have been encouraged, and in some cases mandated, to sell strategic commodities domestically rather than exporting them. This applies to gold, rare earths, and increasingly to silver. If even half of Russia's domestic silver production is now being retained domestically rather than exported, that's another 20 to 25 million ounces per year staying in Russia. Add that to the 30 to 50 million ounces being imported, and you're looking at total annual accumulation of 50 to 75 million ounces. Over 3 years, that's 150 to 225 million ounces. Even if we discount for industrial use and private holdings, the state-level accumulation could easily be in the 80 to 120 million ounce range. Now let's look at the official statements. In recent years, Russian central bank officials and government economic advisors have made multiple references to diversifying reserves beyond gold and foreign currency. Specifically, there have been mentions of silver, platinum, and palladium as strategic reserve assets. In published economic strategy documents and in statements to Russian state media, officials have discussed the importance of holding real assets that cannot be frozen or sanctioned. Gold gets the most attention, but silver has been mentioned explicitly as a complementary asset. One specific statement that caught my attention came from a Russian economic advisor in a state media interview where he discussed the composition of future reserve holdings. He stated that Russia should consider a basket of precious metals, not just gold, and that silver has strategic value both as an industrial input and as a monetary metal. That's not the kind of statement you make casually. That's signaling. And when you combine that statement with the import data and the domestic production retention, the picture becomes clear. Russia is accumulating silver strategically. There's also been policy discussion around creating a commodities-backed digital currency for BRICS trade settlement. While gold is the most discussed backing asset, there have been references to a basket of commodities including silver, platinum, oil, and grains. If Russia is preparing for a system where commodities back trade settlement or reserve holdings, then accumulating physical silver now, while it's relatively cheap, makes strategic sense. You don't wait until after you announce the policy to start buying. You accumulate quietly beforehand, then you announce. Now let's connect this to the BRICS angle. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the recently expanded members is actively working on reducing dependence on the U.S. dollar for trade and reserves. Part of that strategy involves increasing holdings of hard assets. Gold is the primary focus. But silver, platinum, and other industrial metals are also part of the discussion. China as I've covered in previous videos, is already accumulating gold and controlling silver supply chains. Russia is doing the same with gold and now apparently with silver. India has been buying gold, and there's coordination happening behind the scenes. If BRICS nations collectively decided to back a portion of their trade or reserves with a basket of physical commodities, silver would be an obvious inclusion. It's monetary, it's industrial, it's portable, and unlike oil or grain, it doesn't degrade or require special storage conditions. If Russia is accumulating 100 million ounces of silver and China is sitting on undisclosed amounts, and if other BRICS members are doing smaller scale accumulation, you're talking about a collective position that could rival or exceed Western Central Bank and private holdings. And that would give BRICS leverage in any future commodity-backed monetary system discussions. Here's the evidence from official documents. Russia's national security strategy documents, which are published periodically, reference the importance of securing supplies of critical materials. Silver is classified as a critical material due to its industrial applications in defense, energy, and technology. When a country classifies something as critical and strategic, they stockpile it. That's standard practice. So the legal and policy framework for silver accumulation is already in place. Additionally, Russia's sovereign wealth fund and state investment vehicles have mandates to invest in real assets and commodities. While gold gets the headlines, these entities have broad discretion to hold other precious metals. And silver, with its dual monetary and industrial characteristics, fits perfectly into that mandate. If even a small percentage of Russia's sovereign wealth fund allocation is directed towards silver, that's billions of dollars of demand. Now let's talk about why Russia would do this quietly. First, price. If Russia announced they were buying 100 million ounces of silver, the market would front-run them and silver prices would spike. By accumulating quietly through intermediaries, private entities, and gradual imports, they get better average pricing. Second, geopolitical signaling. Openly declaring a silver accumulation program would signal to the West that Russia is preparing for a post-dollar world that invites more scrutiny, potential countermeasures, and political tension. By staying quiet, they build the position without the confrontation. Third, flexibility. Undisclosed reserves give Russia strategic optionality. They can reveal the holdings when it's advantageous, use them as bargaining chips in negotiations, or simply hold them as insurance. Here's the parallel to what China is doing. China accumulated thousands of tons of gold quietly over years before disclosing portions of it. They're doing the same with silver by controlling refining and restricting exports. Russia is following a similar playbook. Accumulate during periods when the market isn't paying attention. Build a strategic position. And disclose it later when it serves a purpose. This isn't conspiracy. This is how nation-states manage strategic assets. Now let's talk about what this means for silver prices. If Russia has accumulated 80 to 120 million ounces, that's roughly 10 to 15% of annual global silver supply. That metal is now off the market. It's not going to flood back into supply. It's held as a strategic reserve, which means it's sticky. It will only be sold or deployed under specific conditions, major price spikes, geopolitical necessity, or as part of a coordinated BRICS monetary initiative. So effectively, you've removed a meaningful chunk of supply from the global market. That's structurally bullish. Second, if Russia continues to accumulate at the rate suggested by the import data, that's ongoing demand of 30 to 50 million ounces per year that's not price sensitive. Russia isn't buying silver to trade it. They're buying it to hold it. That's a persistent bid under the market. And when you combine that with China's accumulation, with industrial demand from data centers and solar, and with supply constraints from Mexico and refining bottlenecks, the supply-demand picture gets very tight. Third, if Russia ever discloses the real size of their silver holdings, or if BRICS announces a commodity-backed settlement system that includes silver, the market will reprice silver overnight, not to 90 or 100, to 150, 200, maybe higher. Because at that point, silver transitions from an industrial commodity with some monetary characteristics to a strategic reserve asset that nations are hoarding. And that changes the game entirely. Here's what the market is missing. Everyone watches Russia's gold reserves. Those are disclosed monthly and widely reported. Russia's official gold reserves are around 2,300 tons. That's well known. But silver? Nobody's tracking it. Western analysts aren't looking at Russian silver imports. Mainstream financial media isn't covering it. And that's exactly why Russia can accumulate quietly. The market has a blind spot, and Russia is exploiting it. Now let's talk about the risks and the counter-arguments. Risk 1. Maybe the import data is misleading. Maybe the silver is going to industrial users and not to strategic reserves. Possible. But the scale of the imports exceeds plausible industrial demand growth. And the timing coincides with policy shifts around strategic accumulation. So while some is certainly industrial, the bulk of it looks strategic. Risk 2. Maybe Russia accumulates silver but then sells it to raise cash during economic stress. Russia has faced economic pressure from sanctions. Could they liquidate silver to fund government operations? Possibly. But gold hasn't been liquidated. In fact, Russia has added to gold reserves even during sanctions. If they're treating gold as untouchable, they're likely treating silver the same way. Strategic reserves are for long-term insurance, not short-term cash needs. Risk 3. Maybe this is overstated and Russia holds far less silver than I'm estimating. Fair. My estimates are based on trade data and inference, not official disclosures. But even if I'm off by 50%, even if Russia only has 50 million ounces instead of 100 million, that's still a significant position that the market isn't pricing in. Here's the bottom line. Russia is accumulating silver. The import data supports it. The domestic production retention supports it. The official statements support it. And the BRICS de-dollarization strategy provides the motive. Wall Street missed it because they're focused on gold, oil, and gas. But silver is part of the same strategic playbook. And if you understand that Russia sees silver as a monetary and strategic asset, not just an industrial metal, you understand why they're willing to deploy billions of dollars to accumulate it quietly. What should you do with this information? If you're holding silver, this is another confirmation that nation-states are treating it as a strategic asset. That's validation. If you're not in silver and you're wondering if it's too late, consider that Russia is still buying at these prices. They're not waiting for lower prices, they're accumulating now. That tells you something about their long-term view. If you're trying to decide between gold and silver, understand that Russia is buying both. But the silver accumulation is newer and less known, which suggests they see an opportunity that others are missing. For traders, this is context. It's not a day-to-day signal. But it's a structural bull case that supports longer-term positioning. For long-term holders, it's confirmation that the thesis is sound. Nation-states, Russia, China, potentially others, are accumulating the same asset you're holding. That's the ultimate validation. Tell me in the comments, did you know Russia was accumulating silver? Or was this completely off your radar? And do you think other BRICS nations are doing the same thing quietly? I want to see if the community was tracking this or if this is new information for most people. If this breakdown exposed a major accumulation story that Wall Street completely missed, Subscribe and comment FinTalk OG, and share this with someone who's trying to understand why silver keeps acting stronger than the mainstream narrative suggests. Because stories like this are the reason. One last thing. This is investigative analysis based on trade data, customs reports, and official statements. Russia's exact silver holdings are not disclosed. I could be overestimating or underestimating. This is not financial advice. It's data-driven analysis of what appears to be happening. Use it as one input. Do your own research and make your own decisions. All right. Follow the data, watch the flows, and I'll see you in the next one.